Welcome back to the fourth week's lectures of Better Leader, Richer Life. Let me now offer in this video some guidance on how to expand the common ground on which you and your stakeholders can build a stronger future with new possibilities for creative growth that serves the interests of the people who matter most to you, including you. The best dialogues are those in which both parties learn something new about each other, and they feel closer and more trusting as a result. So it should be a reciprocal exchange in which relentless curiosity is the order of the day. You're curious about their thinking, and you help them to be open and curious about your point of view. I recommend that you emphasize your goal of discovering more about what they need from you, and keep your needs as, while still important, secondary to what you want to know about what they see when they look at you. A 60-40 balance in the conversation in favor of your hearing from them is a good approach. And even as you speak about what you expect of them, try to be relentlessly curious about how they see your needs. Here's what I need from you, you might say. How does that seem to you? Does it make sense to you why this is important to me? I have found that it's better to let them know in detail what you wrote about them in your assignment last week and to ask them to respond to what you think they expect of you rather than to ask in general terms about what they need from you. When you give them something specific to respond to, then you'll be much more likely to get something useful and specific in return. Here's what I think is important to you. Do I have it right? Is a better approach than asking, so, what do you need from me? The first approach is preferred because it increases the chances that they will indeed either verify your view or you'll have it corrected because they'll be responding directly to your view of what you think they expect of you. And it also shows them that you really have thought about it, which is another way of demonstrating to them that you care about them. But if you would prefer to ask the open-ended general question, well then try that method too and compare the results to see which works better for you. In any case, please take notes during or immediately following each one so that you retain as much as possible about what was said. And these notes are the basis for what I'll ask you to do in next week's assignment, which is to write about what you discovered in your dialogues. Also, keep in mind that when you're done with this lecture, in the assignment this week, I'll ask you to note your ideas for approaching each of your dialogues. Questions to ask, issues to address, and so forth. Preparation is essential for successful stakeholder dialogues. As you go through your stakeholder dialogues, a primary goal is to identify their underlying interests, what they really care about. It's a good idea to remind yourself to distinguish what negotiations theorists refer to as underlying interests as opposed to positions. It's more likely that you'll achieve mutual gains by doing so. Only when you understand a stakeholder's underlying interests can you really grasp what truly motivates that person. So with this knowledge, you're better able to come up with creative ideas for new ways of meeting expectations that are good for this stakeholder and for others, including you. For example, you may hold the belief that your boss expects you to answer emails and be available 24/7, 365. However, you may find, as a result of your inquiry, her true interest is that you are accessible to respond to seriously urgent matters. She needs to know she can count on you, but not necessarily every minute of every day. Knowing this opens the doors to options for how you can satisfy that underlying interest of her feeling secure, knowing that you're going to be there when needed. It's also good to be aware of your own underlying interests. For example, in salary negotiations, people often focus solely on compensation, the dollar amount. That's the position that they focus on. But there are other things that your boss or your company may be able to offer, like flexible scheduling, vacation time, travel opportunities, long-term security, other underlying interests that you have that are significant or important to you. So while your position might be to gain a particular salary amount, you might be able to get your underlying interests met in other ways. And these might work well or better for both your boss and for you. The point is to focus on your stakeholders' interests, and doing so helps you move beyond a zero-sum game mindset. The dialogues, if you do them well, make it more likely to find new ways of achieving wins both for you and your stakeholders. So go after those underlying interests by continuing to inquire. Now, it's possible for people to have multiple interests, and they might even be competing interests. For example, I might want to be aware of my child's activities, but I also don't want to be a nuisance to her by badgering her for information as to what she's doing all the time. Try to capture as much as you can about what really matters, even if that picture is complicated. It's good to remember that you have a restricted view of things, your view, and you're trying to expand it. So just keep on asking questions about what they need and about how they view your needs and what you can do better. And don't just listen passively, listen actively by restating back to them what you hear them saying. This gives them a chance to correct your understanding of what they said, and it tells them very directly that you were actually listening to what they said, another way to show that you care. Critical to seeing things from their perspective is to try to resist any natural tendency you might have to blame them for something that went wrong in the past. Do your best to be sensitive to their feelings and acknowledge them as valid, even if you see things very differently than they do. During your conversations, try to focus on mutual gains, starting from your introduction, in which you tell them what you hope they will gain from the dialogue and possible changes that you might consider or try with the intention of making life a little better for them. Look for common ground or compatible interests where what you want and what they want are not in conflict but are in harmony, and focus on them as much as possible with follow-up questions about the details of how it would look if you were both to act on these interests that you share. For instance, you might discover that your spouse wants you to be thinking more about what needs to be done to care for your home, and that you want to feel more appreciated for your contributions in your home, but you have very limited time to be at home. What small changes could you each make that would satisfy both of your interests in your being seen as a committed member of your household, one who's willing to take care of your home? Most exciting of all will be to discover ways in which there are interests in one domain of your life that are compatible with interests in another domain. How does what your boss want from you line up well with what your children or your spouse or your parents or your friends want from you, for example? Perhaps they both want you to be taking better care of your health. So be on the lookout for interests that are compatible in all the different parts of your life. Try to resist the temptation to look back on how things were in the past and to look forward to your shared future instead. People are more open to creative thinking when they're focused on how to improve things. Keep your mind open to seeing things in a new light. You're on a journey of discovery. It's useful to find out about those things that you can do for others that don't cost you very much and that fit with the rest of your life. So watch out for those possibilities too. To expand the common ground, look for ways that you can find support for what matters most to you. It's often right in front of you. One former student, Carrie, found in her dialogues support for her investment in herself by training for a triathlon. She believed that doing so would allow her to be healthier, to spend time with her friends in training, and ultimately feel better and focus more in her work and in her family life on the things that mattered most. Carrie completed her goal of competing in triathlon, and her stakeholders were gleeful. They saw how it benefited them in some way. Indeed, there is more common ground to be found than most people generally believe. Through your conversations and inquiry with your stakeholders and your persistent focus on the interdependence among stakeholder expectations, you're likely to see more clearly how your performance in one domain affects your performance in the other domains. This allows you to find common ground with your stakeholders and produce results that benefit both you and them. Jason, an associate vice president at a bank, found much common ground in his stakeholder dialogue with his direct boss. Prior to this conversation, Jason was nervous about what he called the availability control that he wanted to discuss with her. Namely, he wanted to initiate an experiment of not checking his email from 7 to 10 p.m. Jason felt that his boss sometimes expected 24/7 work efforts. The stakeholder dialogue that he had brought Jason much relief. His boss welcomed his potential no email between 7 and 10 p.m. experiment, which he then pitched to him during this conversation. It seemed that he'd be open to it, and then he shared some of the similar things that he was trying with his own boss. So Jason found that his assessment of what his boss expected of him was often, in his own words, overkill. After the dialogue, Jason's reaction was, "Wow, it's a shame I didn't have this conversation sooner. It would have melted away much of the stress that I've been having in my professional life." A great exercise for preparing to really get inside their heads is called a role reversal, in which you play the role of one of your key stakeholders and a friend or colleague or a family member pretends to be you. Many people have found this exercise to be quite useful in helping them to see the world through their stakeholders' eyes in advance of the conversation. You might want to do this in preparation for what you believe will be your most difficult stakeholder dialogue. You'll get practice looking at the world from your stakeholder's perspective, as well as practice the skills of listening and inquiring relentlessly. Here's how to do it. Imagine you are your stakeholder, and your friend plays the role of you. Tell your friend the situation with this stakeholder, and then your friend asks you, as you are playing the role of your stakeholder, to come up with all the reasons why a yes answer would make sense to a request you have of him or her, despite the fact that you would normally expect him or her to say no. Talk out loud about all the reasons why a yes would be good for your stakeholder. Don't be constrained by what you have heard in the past from this stakeholder, but instead imagine and say out loud all the reasons you can come up with for why your stakeholder might actually have good reasons to say yes to something that you want, even though he or she has always said no in the past. Your friend's job is simple. Just keep asking why, and tell me more about how this would be good for you. You might be very surprised at what you discover when you try this imaginary conversation in which you are doing your best to see things as your stakeholder sees them. If you learn something new from this exercise, which I expect you will, write it down and add that to your notes in preparation for your actual dialogue with this person. Now, in our next and last video this week, I'll talk about the dynamics of trust to help you to take action to build or restore it, if need be, in your dialogues. And then I'll sum up and describe the assignment for this week and additional resources you can use in completing it.